Welcome to Dr. Z PhD interviews. Today we have a returning guest. This is the first for me. I'm really, really excited for you to be my first returning guest. This is Finley Games. And if anybody's not familiar with Finn, they're really out to be. Finn has incredible content on YouTube channel, on his website. You're an incredible speaker and motivational speaker, in fact, and content creator and author. And Finn wrote this incredible book, which I'm going to try to catch with this my virtual background, top to bottom, which is all about going through the process. I'm toying around with this, don't I? Thank you so much. Going through the process of getting bottom surgery. And for those who don't know or not familiar with Finn, we did do a separate interview, getting to know Finn much more in depth. So I will link it below for people to go look at it. And for anybody who is watching, who is contemplating getting phalloplasty, who is contemplating and maybe desiring it, but is afraid to get it, I cannot recommend Finn's book highly enough because it's really going to help you, in my opinion, to explore those inner depths of fear, of insecurity. So I highly, highly recommend. So having said that, welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to see you again.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. You're just so kind, you really are. And thank you for your review of my book as well. It just helps so much when other people read it and love it and appreciate it. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, well, I truly love your book. So we're going to jump right in because we were just talking how I created this double pager list of in-depth questions. So we're going to try to get through them without really giving away too much of a book. Like I said, the book goes in a lot of depths, psychological depths of trying to really figure out if the surgery is for you. So jumping from the start, let's get to beginning, a start of no penis, right? And in the beginning, you talk about utilizing stent-to-P devices or packers, and there came a point where it just wasn't enough. They weren't just cutting it. So walk me through that process and whether that was a pivotal moment for you to realize that this is just not doing it anymore.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because back then I didn't really know that I wanted phalloplasty at all. There'd been a lot of denial. So I think one of the moments with my stent-to-P device was when I saw it on the sink at night. And in that moment, I just knew that it represented a part of me that was missing. And it was a pivotal moment, but actually I think that was just chipping away at the denial because I was in such huge denial about surgery. I was so terrified. And that denial, that fear of the surgery stopped me from actually admitting that I wanted it. And then, but in this kind of moment where I saw that packer as not representing something that was giving me freedom in being able to stent-to-P, but as something representing what was missing. And yes, it was that moment then that I realized that no matter how scared I was of surgery, I couldn't go for the rest of my life without at least trying to get a penis.
Do you think that was also the moment when you realized that, you know, all of these devices I'm using are no longer really helping with dysphoria?
Yeah, it's a strange process. I think with transition, we change so much. I mean, I have personally throughout my whole transition, from how I felt in the beginning and what I thought I needed to feel comfortable, changed as I transitioned. And for me, it was top surgery. After top surgery, I had this moment of moving from wanting to be a man to knowing I was. I mean, I'd always known I was a man, but it was, you know, I'd begun transition because I knew I was male. But after top surgery, I had no doubt. Seeing my chest revealed, it was just like, of course I'm a man. And then with that came this realization that as a man, I hadn't been born with the parts that for me represent being a male. So it was very much that my dysphoria kind of changed because it was so focused on the top that once that was sorted, suddenly my genitals were just all I could see, literally, because that's removed. And then suddenly there's this top part of me that's just really confirming who I am as a man. And the bottom half just wasn't.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of people mention that the dysphoria tends to shift and suddenly a particular part starts to yield a lot of dysphoria. You talk in the book how there's, and we discussed this in our interview, there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of scary information. And you point out other books in your book that help you decipher some of that information. And at some point you said that your desire for phalloplasty shifted from, I want this, I maybe desire this, to I absolutely need this, period. And at that point, you say that all of statistics, all of the pros and cons of how complicated the surgeries just went completely out of the window. Were you scared when you moved, when you psychologically shifted from want to need? Were you scared you were still going to make a rash decision?
I was terrified, but there was none of this that was a rash decision. I'd thought about this for so long. I mean, from the very beginning of my transition, really, even though I hadn't thought it was something I would do, I'd still been looking at and contemplating surgery all the way through. And so it wasn't rash. But what I mean with statistics is I study psychology. I've studied psychology for years. So I know, as you do as well, that statistics aren't an accurate measure. Statistics can say, look, it's 1 in 100 people. But if you're that one, you know, it's affecting you, isn't it? So for me, it was more that I had to rely on my feelings rather than the statistics, because at the end of the day, I could be that one person that got the complication. But I think with anybody that chooses a treatment or a surgery that has risks, all these statistics do become irrelevant as in a kind of way, because we know that we can't live how we are. And that is so miserable that any risk is worth it, in the hope that taking that risk is going to improve your quality of life. And for me, with that dysphoria increasing, my quality of life was declining. For me, dysphoria means incredibly bad mental health. Bad mental health means really not a good, optimistic future for me, dangerous territory of relapse into addiction, all these things. Those were what I knew were true and real. My feelings were true and real. Statistics really weren't. So I had to just act on how I felt, of course, taking into consideration the risks involved, but ultimately it had to be my feelings I relied on. And I knew not attempting surgery would damage me far more than going through surgery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, oh, it makes perfect sense. You're basically saying that at some point, the risks of not going through surgery had less to do with statistics of how phalloplasty might pan out and more to do with statistics that now you're risking your mental health.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
It became like, you know, one of those, you're at the crossroads, pick one. You're going to continue to risk your mental health, or you're going to continue to risk taking this risks that you don't even know if it's going to pan out for you.
Yeah, exactly. Because every step of my transition, as I made every decision, I was watching my mental health improve. I was watching the years of being clean and sober tick up. So I knew that the path I was following was what was working for me. And exactly that's what I had to keep doing. Trust myself, which is tough. It is tough.
It is tough. It's tough for people to trust themselves when there's so much conflicting information. This is why I love how you point out in the book, the ways, the processes that you went through, mental processes you went through in terms of figuring this out for you. So your book is definitely not a shallow book in the sense of, I have dysphoria, I got to get my body as congruent as possible, and so I'm going to jump on a wagon of all the surgeries. Your book is really a process of figuring out how far you need to take things for yourself in order to achieve inner peace, inner acceptance, inner happiness. And this is why I love it. Now, as I know, because I do a lot of this dump letters, but there's letters process involved when anybody going through a process of trying to get approval for bottom surgery. And you describe this process as incredibly disempowering. What did you find so disempowering about this process of needing to seek the evaluation letter?
As trans people, especially here in the UK, we go through a lot of assessments with psychiatrists, usually therapists, psychiatrists, doctors, to assess our readiness for surgery, to assess whether we're definitely transgender, whether we've got enough dysphoria to warrant surgery. This system is very psychiatric based. It's based on the fact that we used to be seen as having a mental illness for being trans. That's no longer the case, but we still have that similar system. And it gives you this sense that our feelings about ourselves isn't trusted, and we have to be second guessed by professionals. And it doesn't happen once, it happens time and time again. And what's really disempowering is it doesn't really help. I am really a great believer that we need support. To go through this process of working things out takes a lot of work. And I think it would be a good idea to have somebody to check in with, but that person has to be checking in with us for our purpose, not theirs. And what I mean by this is all these checks are to satisfy some kind of governing body that they were right to do surgery on us. It's never
Mm-hmm.
about actually, are we really helping this patient?
Wow,
Really?
yeah.
So that's the difference. They should have checks in place. Absolutely. I would have loved somebody to sit me down and go, you can tell me honestly, how are you feeling? What are you scared of? But we don't typically do this as trans people because we know that if we say, oh, I'm scared, they might say, well, it's not right for you then. But having surgery is scary. So this is the problem. We have a system whereby it's a tick box mentality rather than what feels like a genuine help through this process. And that's
Mm.
what's disempowering. Lots of people choose all different sorts of surgeries and procedures and don't go through half of the rigorous assessments that we do.
So would you say that some process needs to be in place, especially at least, and this is at least my opinion, but it comes to surgeries in regards to genitals, because it's a lot of times irreversible, it's complicated surgery, carries a lot of risk, and people really have to be prepared. Would you say
Yeah.
that maybe just one single evaluation where the person is less inquiring whether this is what you want and need, and more about how you feel, whether you're ready, assessing really your readiness for it?
Yeah. If you're said to be transgender and know your mind, that's it. And then what they could be, which would work better, would be a genuine kind of 6 month check-in. Where are you at? What's happening? So that it's not just like, right, now you want surgery, so we want to see you and make sure. You need to have a relationship with somebody over time so that you can go through this. I mean, people have this for something like cancer treatment. They'll have places they go and check into for support, but never in one moment are people doing that to assess their readiness for surgery or to deny it for them. It's a support service, and it should be for us. We should be trusted to know our own minds, and we should be supported to be able to be honest, because I have so many people who say to me, I'm so scared to say I'm scared for fear of me being judged. And that's another reason I wrote this book. And I'm really honest in the book, because this isn't like you wake up one morning and go, I definitely want this, no question. I went through doubts right up to the morning I was walking to the surgery,
Yeah.
so, and that's normal, and it should be okay to do that. And the culture we have of over assessing, I think actually stops people from talking honestly.
Yeah, and it doesn't negate the fact that you know what you want and this is how you identify. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
couldn't agree more.
surgery. It's going to be scary. Who wouldn't? Nobody in their right mind wants surgery. What we want is the outcome, and that's the difference.
Yeah, I always tell people that if you come to me and you're eager to have all the surgeries done and you're so excited and you have no hesitation and there's, no fears, I say this is to me a red flag, because like I said, surgery should be scary. And it
Yeah,
doesn't mean that, you're not ready for it. It just means that it's scary, and it should be.
yeah,
So jumping into your stage one, because you went to the Phalloplasty for you was a 3-stage process in UK.
it is. Yes, yeah.
So stage one, how did you, by the way, and this wasn't in questions, but I have a lot of people ask me this, how do you decide between what donor site to choose from?
It's so hard. I mean, this is why it's so difficult, this surgery, because there are so many choices, and there is no really clear answer. But for me, I chose the forearm because it's said to have the best, better outcome in terms of sensation and aesthetic. So, I mean, this is why I did look at some statistics, but also because I'd seen results from people who'd had using the arm donor site, and it just seemed to me to give the better result for what I need. But this is the thing, there isn't necessarily one better, it's what's best for us. So I had to look at all the different donor sites, what the possible outcomes could be, how other people had experienced it, and then decide for me on my arm. At the end of the day, I knew I could get a tattoo done as I have now and fine. So, but for other people, having a scar that's hidden is more important. It was a sensation that outweighed everything else, I think, that
Yeah.
really swung me that.
Was there a lot of times I noticed that, oops, I'm getting a little bit, for some reason, internet connection choppy on my end. Where's there, I noticed that when people do choose the forearm as the donor side, I noticed that one of the biggest fear people have is that there might be nerve damage, or they might lose functionality of their arm. Was that your biggest fear?
I did have some fears about that. I think for me, the biggest fear I had was the actual scarring going quite wrong, because I'd seen somebody who'd had a quite poor experience with their graft, and it looked like burnt skin. And I was very concerned about my arm looking like that. But again, it came down to, what would I be better with, having a really badly scarred arm but a successful penis, or choosing a donor site where later on I might think, oh, I wish I'd chosen. It's so hard. It's so hard. So because I use my arm for anything other than typing, as difficult as this sounds, I had to think, well, if I lose a bit of sensation in my arm, it's actually not going to impact my life. So for me, it was worth the risk. And that's what it is all the time. It's about, you can't have your cake and eat it. It's very much everything we decide with this surgery has some kind of risk, some kind of compromise.
Yeah.
So there was never one decision where I was going to have everything I wanted. Whatever I wanted, I had to be willing to lose something else. And if that was sensation in my arm, then yes. I mean, as it is, I can't feel much of my forearm at all. And I didn't really comprehend that beforehand. But it doesn't bother me, you know. So for me, it's a no-brainer that it was a risk that, in terms of what I've got now, it's been worth it.
Yeah, it's always going to be a trade-off. So stage one, as we know, is for those who are watching and somehow are not familiar at all, stage one is really construction of a phallus. That's when the donor site is taken, and that's where the nerves are attached and the blood vessels are attached. And the hope is that everything takes off and everything heals well. So that's the stage one of the process. So you are here at the stage one of the process, and you describe a moment which you literally say you were fearful that your penis is just going to fall off.
Yeah.
You know? And when I read it, I thought, wow, I totally got it, how you would have this fear. And then I wonder how many people actually have this fear. So walk me through that. What was that like? And how long did it take you to actually realize that it's not going anywhere?
Oh my goodness. It was probably a good year until I would actually trust that it was going to stay. I mean, logically, I knew it wasn't going to fall off. They don't fall off. But some operations, you know, you have some necrotic skin, or you might have an infection. You know, there have been in the past worst case scenarios where it's been so damaged that the nerve flow hasn't worked, that they've had to start the whole surgery again. That is the worst fear. But for me to wake up with this penis that was just so perfect, and I just, the feeling of just, there it is, my goodness, yes. And then to be let home and have to look after myself, I was just so scared, you know, because you can't really feel much in the beginning. So am I squashing it too much? Am I looking after it okay? Should it smell like that? Should it look like that? And all of these questions, then it's just terrifying. I think it's because you suddenly, well, for me, it was, I don't want to lose this. I can't go through it because stage one's terrible. I mean, the pain, I mean, you're on your back for a week, you can't move. It is honestly hell. I mean, even thinking back to it, it's so vivid. And the thought of having to go through that again was terrifying. So I was just so desperate to just not do anything that would compromise this new penis. So that's where the fear was. But everyone's the same. Every person I've talked to who's had the surgery is the same thing. They're just so preoccupied for the first 6 months to a year. Is everything okay? You know, is it all right? Is it going to stay there?
Yeah, because the stage one can take a while. Between stage one and stage two, it can take months. I mean, it can take, you know, minimum 6 months. It takes a while to heal. And in this process, right, this process of fear with falling off, but nonetheless, you wake up, you have a phallus. Did you notice a sense of dysphoria suddenly being lifted? Was it an immediate perhaps, or was it over time? What did you feel at that moment?
It's been over time, less and less dysphoria. I think what I felt initially was a complete gender euphoria, I suppose. It was that complete rush of, oh my goodness, that, you know, I'm so glad I did this. And every time, I mean, that week in hospital when I was in huge amounts of pain, I couldn't sleep, just lifting up the covers and looking at my penis would just alleviate all of that. You know, it was like the best medicine in the world. You know, I'm in pain, look at my penis, I feel better, you know. So it was this euphoric feeling. But I talk a lot in the book about how I had times when my dysphoria increased through this, because I had this wonderful penis, but because this first stage, all they do is create the phallus,
Yeah.
you still have your old parts underneath. So now I had this beautiful penis. Sorry, that was my internet. So now I have this beautiful penis with these old parts underneath. And so in some ways I was more dysphoric because now I knew what my genitals should look like and what they felt comfortable to look like. And so it was really tricky with this surgery that you don't just go to sleep and wake up and you're done. It takes years. So there was this amazing euphoria, but I found over time that would ebb and flow, especially when I had some complications as well. It's really been since completing and over these last couple of years since I finished the surgery that the dysphoria has just lowered so much, because now I'm done and nothing's going to be changed or messed with.
Wow. And you also describe this process as, which I think is a brilliant analogy, as if having a baby. You make this at one point, you realize, I think you mentioned in the book that your friend had a baby, and your friend expressed how she doesn't know what the hell to do with the baby. There's no manual. She doesn't know how to take care of it. And you realize that it is so similar. And as you wait, by the way, we were talking about it by now, it sounded like you were talking about having a kid, right? Will I roll over on it and kill it? Is it still alive? I got to check in on it.
Yeah.
So was it truly felt like that? Like you were out in the woods, no manual, here's a new body part, figure it out.
Yeah, and it still feels like it at times, to be honest, especially as I'm still evolving sexually and working through things. I mean, this was a chance conversation. People have to read the book to understand this because it might sound strange. But
Yeah.
for me, it helped me going into surgery thinking like this, because I knew I wanted surgery, but I was terrified. What if I didn't bond with my penis? What if it didn't look like I expected? And my friend said, yeah, that's like me. I don't know what this baby's going to look like. I'm scared I might regret it. There's all these things are normal. And so it was a bit like that when, especially when I came home from the hospital, because I'd gone from having help, advice, and suddenly there I was at home with this brand new body part that needed so much care. You have to keep it at a 45-degree angle at all times because they take a main artery from your arm, which keeps the blood flow through the penis. Now, in hospital, they were checking that every kind of 10 minutes initially, and then every kind of hour until you're released. So I had to just trust all the time it was okay. I'd wake up at night and spend a few minutes making sure it was positioned okay. Anytime you had a slight crease, I would panic. And yeah, there was lots of similarities. And I remember lots of times talking with my friend, and we are going through the same process. She had her baby not long after I had my surgery, and we'd have these conversations. But where the similarities stop is that she could go to some people for advice.
Yeah.
She could go to a doctor, she could go to a nurse, and they would know what to do. Whereas with me, the emotional aspects were similar to having this baby, but in terms of the care, I was on my own. And the only people that really help are trans people who've had the same surgery.
Yeah.
And without that, I don't know what I would have done. I suppose every mum's like that, aren't they? They go to other mums. And so I went to other trans people who'd had the surgery.
Which are not many. And, you make a good point here that she could at least go, there's books. There's books, what to expect when you're expecting, for God's sake, the classic text, right?
Yeah.
But there are no, apart from your book, I don't know of any other book that I've written from a first person account that, your whole book is devoted to the surgery, period. You're not talking about top surgery here. You're not talking about transition process. You're not going to how you figured out your gender. You jump right in, this is all about penis. This is about me going through phalloplasty, the process, and exploring my sexuality in the process of it. So this is another reason why I think your book is so valuable, because it is kind of what to expect when you're expecting kind of manual in a way for a lot of guys out there. So this is the process. You're stage one. You're terrified. You don't have manual. You get sent home. You don't have clear instructions. I'm assuming you're frantic. You're, probably just riddled with anxiety. Was there at any point where you thought to yourself, I'm so angry. I'm so angry at myself for putting my body through this. Maybe I could have just lived my life without going through surgery.
Yes, I tried before this surgery to see if I could just come to a place of acceptance with the genitals I had. I really tried. But for me, knowing there was a solution, I couldn't accept. It was so impossible to accept when I knew there was a solution. So I had to go for surgery. But the anger was more at the situation than at me, at my own decision. The situation that I
Mm.
wasn't born with a penis. For some reason, you know, I was born transgender with no penis. So I was often angry at that, and angry at the system, because in terms of surgery, this is still quite a new procedure
Yeah.
in terms of things, especially in how, you know, there's only one in the UK, there's only one team that does it. They're based in London, so there isn't the kind of satellite care for us. You go to a doctor's, they haven't got much of a clue what they're doing because they haven't seen phalloplasty. So there was a lot of anger at that situation. And this is half the reason why I wrote the book, because there was nothing apart from a
Nothing.
book of short stories. There
Nothing.
was nothing. And I guess my anger is why I wrote the book. I was so cross, and I just thought, well, I'm just going to write it then. And that's why it has got just lower surgery, because this is such a deep surgical process to go through, because you really do have to question everything about yourself, and you have to really trust yourself to make these really difficult decisions. And I've studied psychology, and I'm my own, you know, I'm always my own experiment in terms of like really reflecting on stuff. So the book had to be what was missing for me, somebody to sit with me and help me through these decisions,
Mhm.
somebody to help me through the process. And I guess that anger, this just turned into words on book instead.
Well, I'm glad. I am, and I'm sure that a lot of other people glad. This is the books that I now recommend to a lot of my clients who are seeking the surgery. I'm not sure. I'm like, you have got to get this book. Nobody says it better than this person does. But going back to the stage one, so stage one, you also have not had urethral lengthening done yet, right? So,
Yeah.
so you describe a process there actually, where you're sitting on a toilet, right? And you are, you know, propping your penis up so you can urinate. And you felt that it was so soul crushing for you that you could not really, here you have this penis, you ought to be urinating out of it, and you can't do it. So, and you say, and I'm going to read it here because I thought that was very true and something we seldom think about. You say that you knew it was temporary. Your mind logically realizes this is temporary. Stage two is when I'm going to get urethral lengthened and I'll be able to pee standing up, not a problem. And then you continue to say, but dysphoria does not respond to logic.
Yeah.
So, and this is really very, very true. So walk me through this process. So this is the process where you're just realizing that even though cognitively you get it, stage two coming up, this is going to be all taken away, but you still can help feeling that sense of dysphoria. How did you reconcile? How did you marry, or maybe how did you even live in this period of time between stage one and before you hit stage two?
Really difficultly.
Yeah.
This is what I mean about how the dysphoria got worse at times. And it felt really difficult to say to people, my dysphoria is awful, but you've got a penis. Yes, I have, and I love it. But what it's doing is highlighting all the other stuff I don't have. And yeah, absolutely, to have this wonderful penis, but then that suddenly started to, you know, every time I sat down, I had to prop it on the toilet seat in front of me or hold it in my hand. It was just, you know, the longer between surgeries, because we do have huge waiting lists here, the more that was just bringing up so much distress and anxiety. And you're right, you can't ever just think yourself out of dysphoria any more than you can think yourself out of depression. Once dysphoria hits, I could say to myself, but then it'll probably be a maximum of a year before the next surgery. Doesn't matter, because in that moment, that soul crushing dysphoria is awful. And worse in some ways, because I could see now this penis that would eventually be able to pee. And I had the same, probably a little bit worse actually, when I had some complications through my urethral lengthening as well, because I was successfully standing to pee for a while and then had to be undone because there were some complications, and then returned to sitting down. So I had to get a lot of support through this, which is kind of links into earlier what we were saying about needing professional support through this. But you're too scared to say anything in case they question your ability. So thank goodness for the trans community, because that's who I would check in with all the time, you know, because people understood what that was like. And just to make sure I had that support through, and just kind of hold in mind that this is temporary, and just looking after myself around it, simplifying my life, give myself the space to take care of myself, and just riding it out in the knowledge that eventually I'll get to the other side where everything will be done and it'll be okay. But it is really, really tough.
Mhm.
Really tough.
Yeah, and moving to stage two, which is stage two, for those who don't know, for you at least, was urethral lengthening primarily, right? So
Yeah.
this is to clarify, not the stage when the prosthesis is being implanted, where the implant goes in, that's stage three. So stage two is all about urethra and making sure that there's no blockages, make sure it's all works smoothly, which is in of itself probably carries one of the biggest complications of the surgery. So stage two, and I just can't get out of my head how you describe being able to pee, and this happens for you in the shower, and the euphoria that you describe in the book is, I think I almost jumped up and started clapping my hands for you when I read that. And it made me also realize how significant that was for you, how that was, it's almost, you made it sound in a book as if that was the one of the biggest reasons for getting phalloplasty. Is that true?
Yeah, it was at the time, because I had no idea about how good intimacy could feel at the time. And because intimacy was still a problem for me, although I was looking forward to the final stage, for me, the biggest impact on my life was using toilets. And this is something that most people take for granted, that you can go into a toilet and it's fine. But for me, for other trans people, it's not that easy. And I'd got to the point with my stand-to-pee device where, sometimes it would fail, having to carry a jumper around with me, ready to tie around my waist if I had a mishap, all of this kind of anxiety. So the impact on not being able to stand to pee was huge, especially because I'm somebody that goes to a lot of festivals, a lot of gigs, and so busy toilets. And I would be the only man standing in line for one cubicle when there's like a million urinals. And there were so many awkward situations with male friends where, they'd be running off and using a toilet and I couldn't. It meant, every time I went somewhere, I would have to Google online what their toilet situation was like. And it just has such a huge impact into your life, practically in that sense, emotionally as well, because I could feel really confident in my male identity, and then go into a toilet and all of that would fall away. And of course, men do sit to pee, but they have a choice, and that's the difference. I had no choice.
True.
So it was like every day I was reminded that I was lacking something. So for me, being able to stand to pee meant so much freedom. I could just go anywhere I wanted and
Yeah.
not have to worry about the toilet.
Yeah.
Going to festivals now, going to gigs is so much better. I haven't got to worry about that. I can just go to the toilet, without an issue. And
I'm so glad you brought us up the issue with just spending time outdoors, spending time going to public events. The reason why I'm so glad you brought it up is because I do have people that I work with who want to get phalloplasty and would like not to get urethral lengthening in order to avoid the complications. My philosophy is, get as best close to penis as you possibly can, because you don't know right now, you may not want and you may not care about standing up to pee, but once you do have this phallus, things might change. Just like you show in your book, dysphoria does shift. Suddenly what wasn't so significant becomes significant. And it seems like it was a really big deal for you. So you kind of validate the significance of that and having the choice where people, you can still sit down to pee if you want, but you have the choice.
Yes, absolutely. And I knew, somebody gave me the advice before I started all of this, so to prepare for at least one complication. And I knew that complication would likely be with urethral lengthening. And so I'd already made a decision that I was going to attempt it for a period of time. And if it wasn't, then I'd have to let it go. But I wanted to attempt that. But a lot of people don't. It is one of the most complicated stages. It really is. My surgeon described it as trying to operate on a piece of spaghetti. It's that fine, that delicate, that of course, there's lots of issues, but for me, it was so worth it. I mean, now not even twice about just going to the toilet. It shouldn't be an issue. It's just such a simple thing that unless you've had that taken away from you, I think it's really hard to understand just the impact it can have. Really has.
But it is a big deal. And you actually say that once you were able to pee standing up, you went through a lot of places in your neighborhood using pretty much every, you make analogy of marking your territory, which I think is probably instinctual in a lot of us. Why was it, that was very cathartic for you, sounds like?
Yeah, well, because for so long I've been a prisoner of the parts I didn't have. And it was really stopping me from going anywhere, going into places I didn't know. And now I could just walk in anywhere and it didn't matter. So for me, it was very much like almost like a two fingers up to this invisible prisoner I'd had for so long. So now I could pee, and I'm still like it. I'm still interested in new urinal types in different toilets because, you know, I didn't have that experience. And now I'm just, I suppose all young boys are quite penis centered, want to pee up a tree, a wall, you know, it's a plaything, isn't it? So I suppose for me, there was a bit of that involved as well. I had a little bit of boyhood happening that I wanted to go and pee and, you know, pee in the woods, pee everywhere, just because, you know, I'd not had that experience and it had been denied from me for so long. So yeah.
So stage 2 was very difficult for you. By the way, what was the time between stage 1 and stage 2 for you? What was the waiting period?
It was about a year for me.
Oh, wow.
It's about 3 or 4 at the moment between stages. It's quite horrific. It was a
Oh.
year for me. They say 3 months, 3 to 6 months, but in realistic, it's about a year. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And then between stage 2 and stage 3, what was the wait time for you?
That was a year again, but I had 2 extra surgeries. So I had surgeries. It should only be 3 stages, but I had a complication with the urethral hookup
Right.
afterwards. So I've had another 2 surgeries in between that. So yeah, it was a good year in between.
So stage 3 is happening, right? And sounds like throughout all stages, again, one of the challenges was no manual. Do you think it would have been an easier process if there was a very detailed, this is stage 1, this is what might happen, this is a discharge might come out, this is the color that might happen, this is what most people tend to be worried about. This is why you don't have, kind of a little bit much more in detail in-home instruction, because you don't go home with a nurse. You don't go home with a professional, a healthcare professional. So do you think it would have made anxieties easier if there was such manual in place?
Yeah, I think there will be eventually, because I mean, this is why I speak about this in the book as well, because unfortunately the surgical team in London are in London. So we have to go to our local doctors and nurses who don't understand this surgery. So I know everyone heals differently, but having a basic guideline would help. And I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of an overhaul going on in our surgical system anyway. And I'm hopeful that in years to come, we might have a better system for checking in, because you have to be an advocate. You have to be cheeky sometimes. Email my surgeon. You're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I decided that this is my body. If this goes wrong, it's going to be on me. So if I'm a surgeon, I don't care. I'm going to email him anyway. So I would send pictures and ask, is this okay? Is this right? And a lot of other people won't. So we do need some kind of system like you have with surgery, where you can ring a number and you've got help all the time. We need that. I mean, it would be better for the surgeons anyway, because the better the outcome, the better it is for them. Less to have to fix over time. Exactly. But as it is, we have so many people having this surgery, so few surgeons, so few people that understand this surgery are kind of satellite away from London, that it's tricky. So we have each other as trans people. We have an amazing group of people who help each other through this. And without that, lots of people would be very, very alone. So, I'm really grateful. And another reason I made the book was to kind of a way of paying that forward, because without that help, I wouldn't have managed to get through it at all. So yeah, I'm hopeful going forward, it's going to be much better.
Yeah, I really hope so too. Let's talk about sexuality. A juicy topic you also explore in a book. So for you, sexuality didn't really start exploring until after the stage 3. And it's interesting because at this point, you're actually still not, right now you are attracted to men. Back then at that stage, I think you were still exploring your sexuality by far and by large. And I think you were still maybe even attracted to both genders or any genders in between. And your first sexual encounter actually takes place with a woman, Erin, who is a sexuology body worker. And you describe how empowering that was. You actually say that Erin made you feel like a real man. And that was really, really significant for you. Do you think that having having your first encounter with a woman and a body worker, sexology body worker, somebody who is attuned and has a better scope of understanding, created that safety container?
Yes, the US was just incredible how it put me and Erin together because I mean I was lucky. I mean, not everyone's going to meet a sexological body worker. I was so incredibly lucky that she was my first experience because she did more than help me to learn sexually. She helped me to learn so much about myself as a man. I'd never been with anybody that knew how to communicate properly about sex. I was very sexually immature. I'd had very poor experiences in the past. I dated men growing up. That was never successful. I tried dating women. That was better, but still not right. And I was ready to wait till I'd finished surgery completely and then start exploring. But by chance, we met. And honestly, it's the best thing that ever happened because she was so good at boundaries, about discussing, about checking in, all of these things that I had no idea how to do. She taught me. And it was because of that that I felt safe to explore things I never would have explored because I was only a part way through surgery. And it surprised me that I was intimate. I wasn't thinking I was even anywhere near ready. But I'm so glad that that happened because, yes, she set the stage now going forward where I'm so different sexually in terms of how I think about intimacy. She changed the way I feel about myself as a man in terms of my ideas around masculinity and what maleness was and bodies and all of these things. She just helped me to think very, very differently. And I've got her to thank for my relationship with my partner now, really, because I don't think I'd have had the courage to date a cis man this early on in my journey had it not been for my experiences with Erin.
Wow.
Mm.
Would you, having that experience with Erin, was so powerful and so validating, do you think it's really actually important perhaps for people going through phalloplasty, or I'm actually thinking about even vaginoplasty for trans women, to have perhaps first intimate, that's sexually penetrative, perhaps even experience with somebody who is set those boundaries, somebody who is perhaps has a background in sexology and body work, versus somebody who doesn't, because there's so much anxiety and pressure to perform. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I'd never heard of sexological bodywork before meeting Erin, but I mean, I follow her now. We're still friends, and I see all the things she does. She's an amazing body worker. She works with trans people, and I'll happily give you her links because honestly, yes, I mean, I was so afraid of what it would mean for me after surgery, how I would negotiate dating, how I would negotiate intimacy. So having that knowledge of how to ask for what we want, how to communicate, how to set boundaries, all of these things are so important, really, really important. And I think if somebody can access that, they absolutely should, because yeah, I mean, it's not just helped me to know my body, it's also healed a lot of stuff from the past as well and helped me to make sense of all of that and to be much better at asking for my needs to be met. And I think a little bit as well is because, I've got a history of being socialized as female. And historically, as females, we have lots of poor experiences with this where our needs are often not met. And I think I've got a memory of all of that as well. And I had to overcome a lot of that and learn how to be intimate, how to do that language that I'd never really done before. Because for me, sex was something that was awkward, embarrassing. I didn't know what I was doing, whereas now it's very different.
You also say that she helped you to move toward dysphoria versus moving away from dysphoria. So she told you how to confront it instead of running away from it, right?
Yeah, that was more an accidental realization because there's certain parts of me that I would never let anyone go anywhere near because as soon as they were touched, dysphoria would just like rear its ugly head. But because Erin was very good at checking in, going, how does this feel? Would you like to go outside this boundary and try this? And because I knew clearly that at any moment I could say no, stop, and I trusted that, I was braver to let her try different things and touch me in different places that before then had been a no. And I discovered this experience where rather than go, oh no, stop because dysphoria is there, I could sit with it. And
Mhm.
what I found through that is I didn't overcome the dysphoria, but I kind of moved into a place of neutrality. So it wasn't, I mean, what I have now is gender euphoria. When I'm touched now, my goodness, it's gender euphoria. Whereas back then it was like either dysphoria or nothing. So by moving towards it, I got to this middle place of like just being okay. It wasn't, this is wonderful, I'm over dysphoria, but it also wasn't, I'm in the thick of dysphoria. Is this making sense? It was kind of like
It
this
makes perfect
neutral
sense.
place. Yeah. And
It
that's where I
makes
got to. And that helped me then to actually manage the rest of my surgery whilst I was in so many in between spaces with not being finished, in being more okay to be in the middle of dysphoria in this neutral place where it wasn't as crippling as it had once been. I mean, I still needed the surgery, I still needed to complete it, but I just got to a place where I fell in love with my body, I suppose. For the first time, I properly appreciated my body, even though it
mm,
wasn't the body that was I wanted yet. I was able to come to a place of acceptance with it, which was incredible, really.
very well said. Because I agree. Sometimes you just have to walk in line with dysphoria, and it's still going to be there, but it maybe will be neutralized a little bit more, or you'd feel a little bit more neutral about it. Now, with Aaron, you had your first intimate encounter, first sexual encounter, but your first penetrative sex, so to speak, actually happened with two people that were both trans-identified bodies, right? Trans-identified
Yeah.
individuals. That also in of itself, I would presume, creates a safety net, because here you are with people who have a better understanding of the bodies. They are operating beyond the stereotypes of sexual performance too. What was that experience like for you, and how important was it for you to have that experience with people who also understand the relationship to their gender and to their body differently than, I would
Mm.
say, cis people who take it for granted?
But every experience I had was a complete serendipitous moment. Really, it was meeting Erin and understanding about polyamory that led me to meet these other two people that invited me in to be their third, which is something I'd never have considered doing in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I was attracted to that because it was a negotiated relationship as their third, again, using what Erin had taught me to be with these two people. And by this point, I was pretty sure I was attracted to men, but I was still too terrified to date a cis man, because for me, a cisgender man was terrifying because I was still in a point where I'm not sure my body would measure up, whether I'd be seen as male enough by a man that had always been male and always had a penis. I
Mm.
was worried. I mean, this was about me, it was about nobody else but me, and how my confidence wasn't there. So to be with a trans man, even though he's a man like a cis man is, for me, what was different was the shared understanding,
Yeah.
that understanding that we know what it's like to be in a trans body and to, you know, to have things that are different but to still be seen as male. And so yes, it was a very safe way of me first trying out my gayness to see if I really was gay, because the history of cis men not working and my fears just meant that that was as close as I could get that was safe for me to discover whether I really was attracted to men.
Yeah. And later in the book, you actually having your relationship with a guy named Jamie, um, who also gave you a lot of solid sense of confidence and validity in you being you. But was there still a lot of, I mean, it sounds like there's, and I understand you're saying that a lot of it was cultivating by yourself, which I would also say probably was also cultivated by social cultural constructs and whatnot. How did you, were you able to bypass it by the time you meet Jamie, or is it Jamie that helps you realize that no, you're great, your body is great, your penis is great, everything about you is great, you're definitely enough, more than enough. Was it him, or was it you yourself that somehow led to that realization?
There's a bit of both. The one thing that happened after dating Erin was not just the sexual kind of evolution I had, but
Mhm.
also the kind of masculine evolution I had. I am very kind of flamboyant, arm wavy. I can wear lots of different colors and earrings and things now. But before then, I was very stereotypically male because I've been so desperate to pass as male, be seen as male for so many years, that I developed ways of being that I didn't want to let go of. And being with Erin, I moved into this place of knowing I was male, regardless of the parts I had, regardless of how I looked. And it was actually that started the process of being able to be with a cis man. So that by the time me and my current partner met, I was in a much better place of accepting that I was a man regardless. And if anyone else had a problem with that, that was their problem and not mine. So meeting my current partner, and for him, me being trans was just a non-issue. And I was so surprised because with him being cisgender, I really was still worried, was I going to be enough? But he hardly ever talks about me being trans. It's just something that is just part of my medical history. And that
Yeah.
for me, that's been the biggest help, because I know now that I'm just a bloke. And he said that to me as well, because we had this moment when we were dating where we went in to get a cup of coffee and this barista said, "What can I get you, gents?" And he said to me in that moment, he just thought, "Gents, we're just two blokes. It doesn't matter what his history is." And it's really just, it's never been a problem. I hadn't completed my surgery when we met. I still had the stage 3 to go. But in him just seeing me, I mean, he's a gay man. He's only ever dated men. So that was a real validation for me. If he is
Yeah.
attracted to me, then I must be male, So of course I was at this place of confidence before I met him, but in dating him, he's really helped to solidify that experience of course I'm a male. So seeing myself in his eyes, and I know it sounds sometimes, and people have commented like I'm holding him up as a cis man as different to a trans man, and I'm really not. This is about my own experiences of this. For a cis man to validate me, I can't help but feel more lifted by that, because for me, it felt more judgment would come from a cis man than a trans man, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So it's not like one is different to the other. They're both men, but for me, for somebody that's only ever seen a penis that someone's been born with, and to suddenly accept mine and be fine, yeah, it's been the biggest thing in accepting who I am, really.
And you're still with Jamie.
Yes. Now I'm going to say this because everyone knows that Jay is Chris, but I had to obviously rename everyone in the book to protect their privacy. And we decided between me and Chris to rename him in the book as well, because for me, I talk about this book all the time. So it gives us some kind of privacy. It helps me to remove myself a bit, because I can talk about Jamie without kind of feeling awkward, if that makes sense. So it just gives me a bit of distance between because this is an intimate book. It's a really intimate book. So to have
Very
everyone's
intimate.
name changed, it just makes it easier. So he's
Yeah.
Chris, and everyone knows he's Chris. And people say, "Well, why did you change the name? We all know who you're dating." Yes, but it just helps us to,
Oh.
and if we're at an event together and someone says, "Oh, what about Jamie?" and Chris is there, he then doesn't feel embarrassed. So that's why I changed his name as well.
Oh, wow, that's so great. I love that. I totally respect your privacy. I think that's beautiful that the two of you are still together. I also found that to sum it up, you came to realization that you weren't actually thinking about writing a book about penis, but in doing so, you also realized how it's going to lead you on all this sexual discovery of yourself and how interwiped they are, both sexuality and gender really are in many ways.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when I started my transition, for me, it was going to be top surgery that would change everything, because that was where my biggest dysphoria was. That was the thing that got in the way of my life. But actually, it's been going through lower surgery that's changed everything, because exactly this, our whole selves are wrapped up in lots of different identities, but I suppose the most prominent ones are our gender identity and our sexuality, because that's how we are in our gender is how we interact with the world, and our sexuality is who we are in love with and who we're intimate with. And when those are kind of not right, then nothing is right. So I can understand now how getting the genitals right has helped me to just grow into this whole person that I didn't realize was kind of fractured into bits before. So yeah, it's just been, well, there's no just about it. It's been an incredible journey. And sitting and writing this book, I grew again through the whole process of, I mean, even now I look at bits and go, but actually, I've learned this since then. And it's a constant evolving process, but my body is what's given me that, and the sexuality part of it definitely is it's been an incredible journey this last 3-4 years of this.
It's been so incredible, and such an honor to somehow be also part of your journey by proxy, by reading the book and immersing myself in your experience. And as I said, I don't know if this is going to catch now, but I highlighted the hell out of the book.
Did you?
Which people don't know this, but I'm a voracious reader and I seldom highlight. So it has to be something that really I want to go back and I want to reread, and something that gives me a different layer of understanding. And for psychologists who specialize in gender issues, I gotta say, you touched on things that were even nuanced for me. And I think if they're nuanced for me, I can't even imagine how nuanced they're going to be for so many people. I highly recommend your book to, again, anybody who is watching, who is either planning to get phalloplasty, is maybe contemplating about phalloplasty, or just wondering, maybe it is or it isn't for me. This book is going to, in my opinion, really help you ask yourself all of those questions. And I think you do such a great job demonstrating that the whole process is scary. It was still painful. There were complications that did come up, and you dealt with them and you lived through them. And here you are to tell the story. So grateful that you wrote this book. Thank you so much. So grateful that you found time to jump and talk about this great book. I'm so excited to release this interview to get people to hear more in depth what the process is like, because I don't see that enough. I don't hear about it. And again, like I said, the book is incredibly intimate, very vulnerable, very raw, and very insightful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I had to make it like that. For me, it couldn't just be a book about a penis and about phalloplasty. To make it really worthwhile, it had to be about the inner journey, because that was what was important. Yes, it's great to have a penis, but this internal journey I've gone through in becoming whole and happy is the one that's the most profound.
And I'm also wishing you and Jamie/Chris all the best.
We're engaged now. We're engaged.
Congratulations. That's beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.